Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Hutchins. I'm the Executive Director of the Maine Association of Nonprofits, and I'm really delighted to be here with you once again this morning for another episode of MANP Connects. And today our topic is about mergers and acquisitions. We have a couple of folks who are going to come and talk to you about research that's been done as well as their personal experience going through mergers. But first, I just want to tee this up in the context of what we're experiencing in the nonprofit sector today. And there's no doubt that this is an extremely challenging political and economic context for the nonprofits across this country. And as a result, the conversations and the exigencies around figuring out how we can maintain the important purpose that we serve in society while facing some very difficult challenges with not just with regards to funding, but also differences with regards to how our society is reorganizing itself around priorities about what it even means to serve the public good. And as we navigate that, we want to be having we are going to be required to have conversations about how those resources get shared throughout the community and allocated across our communities. And I just want to offer today the reminder that while though being forced to reconsider those types of realignments of resources and priorities is very, very challenging. There's no doubt that we're in a divided world where it's increasingly difficult to feel like there's the trust to come together and have conversations around our shared priorities for our communities. While right now that's feeling very difficult for so many, and it's very serious in some communities because some communities are actually being targeted and not just deprioritized, but in some cases advocating for just complete overhaul of those communities. So um, we have an opportunity now to think about how we share resources in order to preserve the good and important work that we're all doing. And coming together and starting to have those conversations is important more than ever. And when we're allowed to be in a place to hold a vision where sharing resources and expertise and goals actually can lead to more long-term sustainable communities and better community outcomes, when we give ourselves the space to come together and create those bonds to make that possible, there's no telling what we can do together. And we have many examples of organizations and people who are already doing that. And a conversation today is talking about just one way that an organization could consider beginning to reach out and share resources with others. There are many other ways, and MANP through our events are planning to continue to present different ways over time as to how nonprofits can share resources effectively for better community outcomes. But today we're talking about mergers. And we're going to start with Megan Shore. Megan's going to join me on screen. But first, I want to introduce folks a little bit to Megan Shore. Some of you may remember Megan from her many years working at the Sewell Foundation. Megan now is the principal of M. Shore Consulting, and she's the author of a report that's called Maine, let me get this right, Maine Land Trust Mergers, Stories and Insights 2025. And Megan also serves as the Conservation Resilience Specialist for the Maine Coast Heritage Trust and has been working in the nonprofit and philanthropic communities for a long time here in Maine. Thank you for joining me today, Megan. I really appreciate it. How are you doing?
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here with you and everyone else. Nice to see lots of familiar faces in the Zoom room.
Yeah,
And yeah, and a
yes.
great setup, Jennifer, for this
Oh,
conversation.
oh, great. Thank you. Well, let's just jump right in because folks who are familiar with MANP Connects, or if you're not, you know that one of our goals here is to get in and start the conversation, but we all have a lot going on, so we do this quick, and we don't want to waste any time. So let's jump right in. Megan, from your research, what do leaders need? What are some of the behaviors and attitudes that you have found to be the starting blocks for a successful consideration or actual merger?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot there, and I want to just share just a quick minute on the research that I did just to kind of frame that
Please
context for
do.
folks, which was
Absolutely.
again pretty focused on mergers of land trusts, land conservation organizations. Oftentimes they were with other land conservation organizations, but not exclusively. There were mergers of land trusts with environmental education groups and river and water quality organizations. So a bit of a mix there. The scope of the organizations, most were fairly small, both in terms of staffing, and overall operating budget. So, but I think the lessons that come through this, I think can expand across different sectors. So, kind of wanting to put that out, and I think the framing for mergers in general is, as Jennifer, as you set up, right? Mergers are one pathway of organizational development, and in this time, they're one pathway for organizations that are considering how their work needs to shift in a different context, and opportunities to work differently. So, with that in mind, I think the lessons of what leadership skills are really important in mergers are very on par with what's needed in leaders across the board. And I think, particularly a few pieces that came through was around having that vision of what's possible and being able to think broadly about what's possible, holding curiosity to explore different ways to get there, and the ability to hold threads across different conversations to help people see how kind of where an organization is at or how one conversation relates to another. So that was one piece, that kind of vision and being able to really champion potential vision. Another piece is the ability to, or the recognition of the importance of clear process. And I don't think the leader necessarily has to be the process person, but they do really need to understand the importance of that. Because as we'll talk about later, what information is communicated, there's a stepwise process to exploring and going through a merger or a collaboration process that does take intentionality. And then I think the third piece that I'd really highlight is courage, the ability to open and hold hard conversations, right? Organizations going through this process they're kind of bearing their souls as the process goes forward. You're lifting up the hood, seeing what's happening, and you're gonna see some great stuff, and you're probably gonna see some things that aren't great. But you're also managing people's commitment, volunteer board members, staff members that are really deeply involved in their organizations, they have a commitment to that. And being able to help people have the hard conversations about what's important to them, thinking through like how do decisions get made in governance, all of these things are challenging conversations to have. And it's really important for people to hold those conversations and in a manner that really builds trust throughout the process. And that's another piece that we'll kind of go into a little bit further. But yeah.
And so along those lines, how do organizations start that process of assessing, how do you, I'm assuming there's a lot of it has to do with the organization's culture and their values, and how have you found, I'll speak from experience. Sometimes if you're the executive director and you are interested in exploring the concept, it can be really daunting when someone says, you need to be able to hold space so that everybody can have a hard conversation. And that can be a very daunting, how would you encourage someone who's curious about doing that and potentially getting support and starting those difficult conversations?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a few things. I mean, some is you mentioned culture, and I think culture of organizations is a critical part of the exploration process and really digging into that. But I think for organizations that already have a culture where hard conversations are part of the just the way of the organization, that's of course a great starting point, and not necessarily the normal starting point for a lot of folks. I think what I saw in the organizations we looked at is generally the conversation started in a really small group, like a couple people maybe within an organization, or maybe it was the executive directors or board presidents of two different organizations started exploring, what would happen if we worked differently together. And in those informal conversations, they're starting to build some trust and a kernel of an idea. And then it's a little bit of a circling out and starting to expand the conversation to build a few more, test the idea, build potentially some other supporters within that process. And that's kind of the very early exploration process. And then when you get enough momentum to say, okay, we actually really want to sit down and more formally explore this, then I think bringing a process consultant in can help. So there's two pieces. There's the leaders, the kind of champions of the idea of exploring this, being able to state clearly like we need to have open conversations and kind of lean into that and demonstrate it themselves. But then bringing in a consultant, an outside facilitator who can help to set that expectation, and not just expectation, but really help to cultivate the space for that. And I think that outside person plays a really critical role. We saw some, in one particular merger, I know we looked at that really things were going very off the rails because there were very different cultures between the organizations, and someone approached the other organization a little out of sync and just in a way that didn't land well. And by bringing in a consultant who was trusted by both organizations, completely shifted the dynamic.
That's really helpful to know because that happens a lot, right? It's easy to and get maybe you're going like you said, maybe you're going along having these conversations and then some some something happens with regards to the communication that can
Yeah.
derail the conversation. But then bringing someone in, a trusted third party um, who maybe not have the has the a stake in the game in the same way, right? And a more objective person can be really helpful. I've
Yeah.
Megan, this I'm curious, because I feel like I say this sometimes in many different contexts, and I'm just wondering if you found this at all in your research that because I want to test this a little bit in terms of
Yeah.
whether or not it's useful. Um, is is being clear on, and I'm going to use a phrase that seems to be ubiquitous right now, so forgive me, but um, naming your North Star or your ultimate purpose for the organization, and making that clear so that there's an idea of a shared vision that two organizations, right? It's sort of like, well, why are we coming together?
Yeah.
And trying to put that front and center so that it's about the community outcome, the vision for the community that is where everybody can come together as opposed to more ego driven. Does
Yep.
that follow?
Absolutely. And I think that starts even before the organizations are talking to each other, of like individual organizations saying like, why are we here? What are we here about? And what's going on in our community that we're trying to attend to? And how can we best be positioned to do that? And then in those exploratory conversations, absolutely first step is really thinking about like why really and being curious about it. I think it's really helpful for folks to come into it with that curiosity of like, we're going to explore this. We might choose to merge. We might find like that's actually not the right path for us. But those open conversations and really thinking about the why is super important. And we saw through many of them, like the whether the facilitators, the leaders, and most organizations going through a merger, just process wise, kind of had a smaller exploratory group that was working a lot between holding the whole process and then reporting back out to the bigger group and getting information from folks. But that group would start every meeting with why are we here? Kind of that revisiting of the why. And People, change is hard and people are really invested in the organizations. And so there's a lot of points where people start to question, wait, why are we doing this? This is hard. Or there's a sense of loss that comes with merger. And sometimes, and I think this is a huge misnomer for mergers, but sometimes there's a sense of, oh, this is because we didn't do something right. Like it can be some interpret it as a sign of failure, and it's not at all. It's the next stage or a possible next stage in organizational development and meeting mission in the context of the day. And I think that's such an important framing to hold front and center, beginning of meetings, ends of meetings, and in one-off conversations, which also happen if people are having concerns are being raised. Sometimes some one-on-one conversations are really helpful to both unearth more what are the concerns, but also how to move through those concerns.
Did you did you across any examples where um, there might have been a situation where there were two organizations that were small and had limited resources, and maybe one was more curious about the idea of potentially coming together and maybe more resistance in the other one?
Hmm.
And did you have any insights as to how they might have overcome the resistance of one organization to exploration?
Absolutely. Yeah, we saw that in actually quite a few. And
Okay.
sometimes it was about I think that starting with curiosity instead of here's where we're trying to go
Mm.
was one key piece of that. Another, sometimes just starting with a project, right? And in most of the mergers that actually happened, there had been maybe as long as 5, 10 years ago, some other conversations about, should we work together differently? Should we merge? So they're not always, you might start a conversation and they don't always go the full pathway, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to happen down the road either. So some testing of the waters, some trying a project together, that starts to, again, build relationship between organizations, starts to build a sense of, again, what show a little bit more like what could be possible. I think we're a couple ways that came through, and then sometimes again, kind of each situation's a little bit different, but trying to assess like what are the relationships? Do we have any board members in common? Do we have um, shared members or people that we might talk to that can open doors that might otherwise not be as open?
Yeah, yeah. So really approach based in trust and sharing, not a takeover mentality or subsuming a smaller one, really approaching it as in we have this maybe let's see if we
Yeah,
have a shared vision for our community and what are the assets that we can put on the table to achieve that vision together, right?
that's right. That's right. And I think in today's, I think organizations clearly have their mission and many are also thinking like, how do we work a little differently? And, our mission, I think people are seeing more of those intersections between, work in this case in conservation and access to food or community economic development. So that it opens other opportunities to think collaboratively in different veins. And I think those avenues also pertain to really starting to look a little more cross sector and organizational collaboration as well.
Right. Um, many nonprofits have limited capacity. Your work in philanthropy and nonprofits, you've seen this firsthand. That yeah, capacity, time, reason, funding. It's not totally easy for everyone to go out and get a consultant who's because some of these processes, right? And that's actually a side question: is how much time do these take? But what kinds of external support have helped organizations that you've seen that it would be worth lifting up here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, and I haven't fully looked at who's in the room, but I think, from the funding community, just support to have so that organizations going through this have the time to hire or have the finances to hire an external consultant, that process consultant. Other consultants that are really helpful that many folks spoke to is as you get further down the road and you're starting to look at due diligence and then starting to bring your organizations together, like legal legal services. Rob Levin in Portland was the lead attorney for a lot of these mergers and often set it up to actually represent both parties with their agreement, which I think kind of streamlined some of the processes, which was helpful. Accounting services to go to look at the books, right? You want to, as you're going through a merge, you really want to understand what's the financial situation. So that support, and then on the flip side, helping to bring the books together if an organization does merge. One of the folks we talked to really spoke super highly of having someone who can come in and bring your systems together, your databases, all of the different systems that many organizations have. Even if you're using the same system, you might be using them differently. So that's a huge amount of time, and that's kind of a post-merger piece, or leading up to and post-merger piece. So there's definitely several consultant type roles. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time of board chairs, in particular, of executive staff, of finance staff, depending on the size of the organization. Some folks really talked about if we could have brought someone in to backfill some of the work to create a little more fluidity in the executive director or the finance person's time, that would really help organizations. I think the other piece are the uplifted. It's a little less about an external resource, but just that knows that you go through the merger process, you've done all this exploring about what's the organization's culture, who do we want to be in this new organization that we're forming, because that's really what's happening with a merger. You're creating something new. Um, and it takes time for that new to form. And so really building in the time for the organization to gel, as and unify. And that's one area where, again, some additional financial support and human time can be really helpful. Um, there was one other piece I wanted to say. What was it?
Well, Megan, I'll tee it up for you a little bit and give you a chance to think it through. I'm gonna ask Rachelle to join us in just a second, but as you sign off, what is sort of a parting word of advice, or what have we not mentioned this morning that you would really like to share with folks?
Mm, um, yeah, so many. I think one key thing we touched on just very briefly is that the importance of the communications and being really thoughtful, being thoughtful about the process, but also who you communicate with and how, and the agreements that get made between the organizations about communication are really critical. We definitely saw some where people felt, oh, we're fine. We're just going to talk. We're informal. I'll just say, informal about the communications, and that did not go well. People, right? You have really thinking carefully about what are we going to communicate to whom and in what way. And we have some great examples in the report of communications done super well, and it makes a huge difference, and it helps you bring your supporters along, your members along, helps you get to kind of where you're trying to go. And each step is a process in building that trust. Um, and I guess the final thing I would say is just that reinforcing, like in a merger, you really are creating something new, even if the organization has the same name as one of the organizations. It's something new, and it's so important to everybody to honor the organizations that were, and kind of say thank you and move into the next, and start to really present yourselves as here, this is who we are now.
Right. And really frame it, as you said, it's not that anybody did anything wrong, right? Everybody is doing something for the public good, and they're coming together to contribute in a new way, but the contributions of the past made that possible. And that's just so important, because we're in this work not for just with our hearts and our desire to make the world a better place, and it's important to acknowledge everyone's intentions in that
Yeah.
process. Thank you very much, Megan. I know
My
that
pleasure.
your report is full of really great information, and I appreciate the fact that we put a link in our chat. We're also sending out a follow-up email that will have a link to it. So thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, take care. Okay, now we're gonna have Rachelle Curran Apse come, and she is like got a you merged a lot of organizations, Rachelle. So I I need to read the list. Rachelle used to be the executive director of the Presumpscot Regional Land Trust, and she did that for almost a decade. And while she was there, she guided the mergers of between Wyndham Land Trust, Gorham Trails, Presumpscot River Watch, and Presumpscot Regional Land Trust. So you have some experience, right? How are you this morning?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm really good. I'm really grateful that you're here today. Could you start by talking about what were the primary motivations behind these consolidations?
Yeah, so I started with the organization in 2015, and I knew I was coming on to an organization, a small nonprofit that was struggling. And I spent time talking with each board member and finding out what's their vision, what's their hopes, what's their dreams, and also what are the challenges. And then also through some of the larger supporters who are not board members. And I learned pretty quickly that one of the biggest challenges, there was too much overlap in the region with our organization's mission and other organizations, and there was serious confusion by the municipalities, other organizations, and what is our role. And so it became clear to me that we needed to start talking with the other organizations in the region where there was strong overlap and see if they also were interested in collaborating and potentially merging. And that process happened through a variety of different formats. But the nice thing is a couple of my board members knew folks from the other organizations. And so we weren't starting cold. We knew there was some relationship already. And then we were very intentional about getting together and learning more about each other and finding out, is there overlap and interest in working more closely together and potentially merging?
What I hear you saying is that you started just like Megan was saying with curiosity
Yeah.
and shared purpose. Did you find that it challenging to find the shared purpose among those different groups?
I think that every group felt exhausted. They felt already just doing the core mission they were all burned out. And so the idea of additionally talking about organizational management, collaboration, mergers felt totally overwhelming. And that is also really reasonable and I think very normal, and one of the biggest obstacles to shifting the dynamics in organizations is it just feels too exhausting. And so I think that was one of the biggest challenges, is figuring out how to connect with people at a space and a rate that felt meaningful and folks could see value, and it didn't increase the overwhelm.
Hmm. How long did it take in your case?
So I think that in retrospect, we look back at it and go, oh, it was really fast. But I have to tell you, from the moment we started the conversations until the merger was complete, it felt very slow. And I think that's because every person in leadership mattered. And so there was so much time spent making sure that we were engaging meaningfully, which takes time, with every leadership person in every board. And so it was, but the end result was beautiful trust building. And so it was both while in it, it felt slow. And then you look back and go, oh, it was less than a year.
Hmm. That does seem, if you can do it in under a year, that seems pretty quick to me, actually.
Yes, looking back on it, it seems very quick. That's right.
Yeah, right. But in the moment, right, I don't know if this is exactly how you're perceiving it, but I can imagine in our world of constant need to keep moving forward and being productive and having and making progress, that idea of moving at the speed of trust can sometimes feel like, the sloth from, Zootopia. For
Yes,
anyone who might know that reference.
it really does. And I think the piece that I saw both in myself and others was, I don't have time for this conversation. But in the end, they were so critical. It was like just needing to figure out, carving out little bits of time for those trust building conversations. And the end result was so worth it. But in the moment, it's hard to say, I don't have time. I have to write
Yeah,
this grant report. I don't have time
yeah,
to have this other
right,
conversation.
right. So, Rachelle, did you find yourself in some cases literally saying to someone, "I hear you, I respect that. If I can just have, can I just ask you to commit to talk to me once?" And then maybe at the end of that conversation, there was a little bit of acknowledgement of like, "Okay, I see how this might be valuable." Was it a little bit like baby steps with some folks, you think?
Yeah, and I think I did it a little differently. It would be like, let's just have a 5-minute phone conversation, right? And so it's
Even five
very,
minutes, like you were
yeah,
like, just
let's
five
just,
minutes.
right, we're just kind of a quick phone conversation, and then, I'll call you back next week, and maybe it's a 15-minute conversation, and then maybe later it's coffee. So it was just a slow build.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I just want to thank you for that. I just, again, I put my executive director hat on, and I think I can imagine, you're just like, yeah, but how do I approach someone who is giving me that very important insight of I don't have time for this. So thank you for that. Megan talked about even though acknowledging the past and recognizing that you're creating something new. And I wondered if you could talk about how that may have shown up in your experience with the land trusts. And also, did you think about trying to preserve any aspect of each unique mission? Like how did that show up in your experience?
Yeah, and I think the tangible answer was, we made a decision. We created a merger committee and invited every single board member from all 3 boards to join. And then, of course, people self-selected out, and we had a reasonable number. And then that merger committee decided, we're going to invite every single board member from all 3 boards onto the new board. And there was a little bit of concern things would get unwieldy. But in retrospect, it was such a good decision, because one of the key things was people feeling worried they were going to be left out, their ideas were left out, their core values would be left out. And by opening the doors really wide from moment one through the merger, people self-selected out over time, and no one felt left out. And I think that was a huge piece. And there was some managing the chaos, but that was so much better to have the inclusive chaos than the people feeling excluded.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's sort of picking your challenges. It's going to be, as Megan also said, there is loss involved in this type of combination, and so uh, it's going to be hard no matter what. And so thinking through where those pain points can be are going to be held is really important. Um,
That's something I would have done a little differently. Uh, when I heard people express concerns about loss, I think I would have spent a little more time to understand what exactly that perceived loss was and figure out ways to more proactively address it, because some of those that we didn't spend enough time on kept resurfacing for years afterwards. And
Mhm.
so the time spent in year one digging into those would have been a tenth of the effort of sort of remediating issues in the following 5 years.
Mm. Jody in chat raises a really important point, and it depends a little bit on exactly what we mean by membership organization, but I'm going to assume, Rachelle, that each of the land trusts had either members or donors supporting those individual organizations. Can you talk a little bit about how donors and volunteers were brought into this process and then combined to the new organization?
Yeah, so once the so we had the merger committee who did the grunt, really all of the heavy lifting, all the agreements, the provisional mission, and spent a lot of time. I was so impressed that it was maybe a group of 8 or so folks who met with me every other week, and we really dug in and did the work together and brought it back to the boards. Once the boards felt good with the overall outcome and gave a provisional approval, because they were actually membership votes, but the board gave provisional approval for the mergers. We then went to all of the volunteers and all of the donors, and board members had lists, and they called every single person and left voicemails and sent personal emails and had so many conversations. And we did open conversations where we invited people to come in person to 2 different meetings. And so we spent a lot of time as the leadership reaching out to every single supporter and trying to find out, what are we missing? What else should we be thinking about? How do we think differently about this? How do we bring everybody together and create a shared vision? And the fun thing, we then had a celebration. It was a mix where we both had the membership meeting, but it was at an orchard. And so people came together, we had food, we had cider, we did the merger votes, but it was also a celebration. We did a slideshow and celebrated each of the organizations, their past successes, and then had a time where everybody who was there, we had boards where people came and they wrote down what is it that they want to see for the future for this new merged organization. So it was a celebration, it was a bringing of the new, and it was an engaging future vision. So it was a lovely way to transition.
Yeah, that's great. And again, kudos to you. You did a lot of work in under a year. That's a lot of engagement in the community. In general,
it felt critical. It felt critical to the future
yeah,
of the organization.
yeah, yeah. And so, as we wrap up, what's a lesson learned or a key takeaway that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I learned was to listen and really hear what are the pauses, what are the concerns, but also what's the vision? Where do people want to go? And so balancing those two, not too much on the concerns, not too much on the vision, but to share those two together. And that gets at the heart of building those trusting relationships and then bringing both of those pieces together. And it takes time, but it was so worth doing. And I would say to every organization that is considering mergers, identify the couple board members who see a future vision and spend time with them and then build out from that circle of folks and build and build and build until there's a larger and larger shared vision.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time, Rachelle, and for all your work. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I just want to highlight as we wrap up this morning, I just want to highlight in the chat, we some great conversation around how do you handle these types of mergers when you might have a membership, and membership can mean a lot of things. And sometimes with clubs in particular, the membership actually has legal authority as outlined by the bylaws. And so even just the point that my colleague Molly made in the chat about thinking about there's the engagement buy-in side that we've spent a lot of time with Megan and Rachelle talking about building that trust, taking the time, listening with curiosity and humility, focusing on your North Star, what shared vision can you build together, taking the time to do that and to bring everyone along. There's also the legal side, and Megan talked about having attorneys and accountants involved, because you do want to look at your bylaws and make sure you're following those commitments that you have made legally to the organization and its members. So I really appreciate making those distinctions. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, and I commit to ending right on time with all of you. I hope that you found our conversation useful. If you wouldn't mind joining me in the chat and thanking Megan and Rachelle for their time this morning and their expertise. They both are consultants in the community who I'm sure you can reach out to. We also have a business finder at MANP where consultants are listed and who may be prepared to help you with this, so you don't have to start from the old yellow pages. Does anybody out there know what the yellow pages are anymore? And so that's another resource for you. I do want to highlight a couple of things. So our next MANP Connects is November 21st, and we're going to have Britt Gleixner-Hyatt, who is the new director of the Maine Commission of Community Service, otherwise known as Volunteer Maine, and she's going to be joining us to talk about her new vision and strategies around the work of Volunteer Maine. And we really want to build these relationships between our state resources to the nonprofit sector. And Britt's going to be a really great, engaged speaker who has a lot of energy and expertise in this area. So I'd really encourage you to put November 21st on your calendar to meet Britt. She's going to be joined by Brian Ambret, who's the director of the State Resilience Office, which was an office that was set up by state government to support the communities that are preparing for climate change. And we know that our nonprofit sector, many people in our nonprofit sector have a lot at stake when it comes to these types of conversations. And again, we want to be building bridges between our public government resources with our nonprofits, because again, it's all for the public good and it's for these shared visions in Maine communities. So I hope you can join us for that. And also don't forget, Together for Good is Maine's nonprofit gathering for the year on December 4th. It's going to be at the Abramson Center at USM, and we hope you can all join us for that as well. But for now, it's 9:45 on a beautiful Friday morning in Maine, and I'm going to say have a great day. Thank you for being here.